golden screens of Hollywood once glowed with legends who seemed untouchable, immortal, and pure. Gregory Peck, Errol Flynn, Clark Gable, their names carried the weight of myth, and their faces were sculpted into America's dreams. These men weren't just actors, they were monuments, cast in celluloid light and sold to the world as the epitome of charm, courage, and virtue. Families gathered in darkened theaters to watch them fight villains, win wars, and fall in love with grace. To millions, they were moral compasses dressed as leading men. But history is never so kind. Behind the carefully polished reels and glossy magazine spreads lay secrets far darker than the scripts they performed. Studio contracts weren't just about movies, they were iron shields, designed to silence accusations, bury scandals, and protect profit at all costs. The adoring public saw chiseled jawlines and noble speeches, while behind those locked studio gates, young starlets, assistants, and even co-stars whispered about violence, obsession, and abuse. It was a world where cameras captured smiles, but microphones never picked up the screams. Hollywood's most celebrated icons lived double lives, saints in projection booths, sinners in private rooms. One voice eventually pierced that silence, the whistleblower who dared to tell the stories the industry tried to erase. He spoke of stars who weren't just flawed, but monstrous, hidden behind the gold curtain of the so-called Golden Age. And as the names were revealed, one stood above them all: Gregory Peck. The man once praised as the very embodiment of justice became the headline that no one ever expected. These were no longer roles from a script, but crimes that Hollywood had concealed for decades. And in the list, Gregory Peck revealed the final name is sure to send a chill down your spine. To the world, Gregory Peck was the marble statue of moral strength. In 1962, he stood tall as Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird, delivering lines that became etched into the American conscience about justice and compassion. Critics hailed him as Hollywood's conscience, and magazines printed his face as if he were the embodiment of integrity itself. Even decades later, audiences recall Peck's voice, steady and warm, like a father reassuring a troubled child. But the shadows that followed him tell a far different story. Behind closed doors, Peck was rumored to be domineering, unpredictable, and even cruel to those who worked beneath him. Studio insiders whispered that his calm exterior was a role, nothing more. A 1950s assistant once recalled, "He was the perfect gentleman on camera, but once the lights went out, you prayed you hadn't angered him." The press rarely dared to touch those rumors. Newspapers of the era were loyal to the Hollywood system, publishing only glowing reviews and sanitized interviews. Still, fragments of the truth slipped through. In 1967, a trade paper hinted at personal controversies that would tarnish a lesser star, a cryptic nod to accusations that were quickly buried under studio pressure. For those who worked closest to him, the betrayal was personal. Co-stars remembered his temper and controlling presence on set. Behind the aura of dignity, there was a man capable of intimidation and icy withdrawal, a contrast so sharp it left some in fear of crossing him. Fans adored the fatherly figure on screen, but colleagues whispered that he had perfected the role too well. It was a mask he wore, not the man he was. Hero in the cinema, tyrant in the wings, that paradox was what shook Hollywood's loyal admirers most. As one disillusioned fan said years later, "If Atticus Finch could hide demons, who among us can we trust?" And if 20,000 fans felt it, maybe you do too. This was only the beginning, the first crack in the golden statue. If Gregory Peck was the noble father, Errol Flynn was the eternal rogue. His films, Captain Blood 1935, The Adventures of Robin Hood 1938, made him the face of adventure itself. With sword in hand and a grin carved into legend, Flynn was Hollywood's promise that charm could conquer anything. Women swooned, men admired, and gossip columnists called him the perfect cavalier. But Flynn's private life was not the storybook romance audiences believed. In 1942, headlines blazed across America. Errol Flynn charged in Morrell's case. 2 underage girls accused him of statutory rape, detailing encounters that contradicted every image of the dashing hero. The trial became a national spectacle, with prosecutors painting him as predatory while fans protested outside courthouses, clutching banners that read, "We believe in Flynn." The jury acquitted him, but not before the phrase, "in like Flynn," became a darkly ironic cultural stamp. The acquittal didn't silence the whispers. Behind studio gates, insiders spoke of wild parties drenched in alcohol and recklessness. One colleague described his lifestyle as a hurricane no one could stop, least of all Flynn himself. Women who entered his circle often left scarred, their stories muted by fear of retaliation or disbelief. Hollywood, desperate to keep its cash-making star untarnished, spun the scandal into legend. Flynn's lawyers and studio heads reframed him as the victim of jealous girls and overzealous prosecutors. Fan magazines printed smiling portraits, calling him misunderstood, even persecuted. Meanwhile, the real victims slipped into silence, forgotten by an industry that had already chosen whose story mattered more. The contradiction was almost unbearable. The man who defended the weak as Robin Hood was accused of preying on the vulnerable in reality. To his fans, he was still the swashbuckler who leapt from chandeliers. To those who knew the truth, he was a darker figure, reckless, manipulative, and untouchable. Decades later, survivors still described the pain of never being heard. "The world adored him," one woman said, "but I remember the other man, the one they wouldn't let me speak about. Hero on the silver screen, predator in the shadows." Fans still whisper about that trial, and if you've heard it, you know why. Charlie Chaplin was cinema's first global superstar, a man whose Little Tramp character turned laughter into a universal language. With a cane, bowler hat, and a tilt of the head, he carried audiences from poverty to poetry. By the 1930s, Chaplin wasn't just an actor, he was a cultural prophet, hailed as the genius who elevated comedy into art. Critics compared him to Shakespeare, and magazines praised his childlike innocence. But Chaplin's private life revealed obsessions that shattered the image of innocence. His romances consistently drew toward the very young. In 1943, scandal erupted when actress Joan Barry accused him of paternity. The trial became national news, painting Chaplin not as the lovable clown, but as a manipulator entangled with a woman decades younger. Though blood tests excluded him as the father, the court still forced Chaplin to provide child support, a ruling shaped more by public outrage than science. Headlines screamed betrayal, Chaplin unmasked. This wasn't an isolated case. He had already married Mildred Harris when she was just 16. Lita Gray, another teenage bride, later wrote in her memoir that Chaplin's controlling behavior left her broken and terrified. Their divorce in 1927 became one of Hollywood's ugliest scandals, with depositions detailing his temper, infidelity, and demands. Studios scrambled to soften the narrative, framing Gray as opportunistic, while Chaplin continued to enjoy international acclaim. The contradiction was impossible to ignore. The man who made millions laugh with childlike whimsy repeatedly blurred the line between youth and exploitation. Hollywood critics whispered about his unhealthy fascinations, but the industry had too much invested in its first superstar to expose him fully. Instead, Chaplin was packaged as eccentric, misunderstood, even persecuted for his politics, while the darker patterns of his private life were buried under laughter reels. Colleagues remembered the genius on set, obsessive, brilliant, relentless, but they also remembered the controlling figure behind the camera, a man whose need for perfection spilled into the personal lives of those closest to him. His genius was unquestionable, his morality was not. Comedy turned into tragedy, innocence into obsession. For some, his legacy remains luminous. For others, it is stained forever. That was only the surface. The real secret came later. Spencer Tracy was the definition of gravitas. His performances in Captain's Courageous, 1937, and Boys Town, 1938, earned him back-to-back Academy Awards, a feat that crowned him as Hollywood's man of honor. Audiences saw in him a blend of warmth and authority, a figure who could play priests, fathers, and judges with a sincerity that felt unshakable. He was America's moral anchor, the actor who made decency cinematic. Yet behind that shining image was a far different man, volatile, unpredictable, and violent. Tracy struggled with alcoholism throughout his life, and those close to him described terrifying shifts in his personality once the bottles were drained. His long-term partner, Katharine Hepburn, often excused his behavior in public, but private recollections told of nights when Tracy's temper boiled into cruelty. Biographers detail how Tracy's wife, Louise Treadwell, endured years of turmoil. Though the couple never divorced, she spoke in guarded tones about his rages, hinting at nights when silence was safer than honesty. One insider recalled, "You never knew which Spencer you were going to meet, the saint from Boys Town or the storm that could rip apart a room." The studios shielded him fiercely. MGM understood Tracy was box office gold, and so long as his troubles stayed off the front pages, they looked the other way. Arrests for public drunkenness were hushed with payoffs. Bar fights were rare. Arrests for public drunkenness were hushed with payoffs. Bar fights were rebranded as misunderstandings, and journalists who tried to dig deeper often found their stories mysteriously pulled before printing. The bitter irony was glaring. On screen, Tracy embodied the very essence of control and moral clarity. Off-screen, his life was chaos, filled with bruised friendships, broken glass, and whispered apologies that never healed. Katharine Hepburn once admitted in later years that loving Tracy was a full-time job, a responsibility as much as a romance. Her words were tender, but they also carried the weight of exhaustion, the scars of decades spent protecting a man the world saw as a saint. Applause thundered in the theaters, silence haunted the homes. And if legends like Spencer Tracy could be so deeply divided, what did that say about Hollywood itself? John Wayne wasn't just a movie star. He was America itself, or at least the America Hollywood wanted to project. Towering in westerns like Stagecoach, 1939, and war dramas such as Sands of Iwo Jima, 1949, Wayne embodied patriotism, grit, and a kind of rugged honesty that made him the nation's cinematic sheriff. To generations, he was the man who stood for truth, justice, and the cowboy's code. But peel back the mythology, and another Wayne emerges, one defined not by courage but by cruelty. Wayne's off-screen reputation was marred by drunken rages and unsettling outbursts. Colleagues recalled his aggression on set, where he berated crew members and intimidated co-stars. He didn't just want to win a scene, one technician remembered. He wanted to crush anyone who challenged him. The darkness extended beyond Hollywood soundstages. Wayne's political rhetoric, famously explosive in a 1971 Playboy interview, revealed deeply intolerant views that shocked many who idolized him. He dismissed entire communities with words as sharp as a fist, a reminder that the patriotic icon's values were not as noble as his films suggested. In private, relationships told their own story. His marriages were marked by turbulence, with accounts of jealousy, volatility, and emotional cruelty. Friends often excused his behavior as the Duke being the Duke, but those closest to him bore the brunt of his temper. Behind closed doors, the all-American hero was a man battling demons and taking others down with him. The industry never dared to challenge him. Wayne was too big, too profitable, too symbolic to tarnish. His films defined Hollywood masculinity, and the studios ensured that the man himself remained untouchable. Journalists who questioned him faced threats to their careers. Actors who resisted him risked blacklisting. The contradiction was thunderous. On screen, he fought tyranny. Off-screen, he embodied it. Fans roared with applause when he stood against outlaws and foreign enemies, but few knew that the real violence was often closer to home. Oscar gowns against bruises, hero speeches against bitter rants, cowboy justice against private tyranny. And still, millions adored him, proof that sometimes the mask doesn't just hide the truth, it replaces it. To the world, Clark Gable was the king of Hollywood. His smirk in It Happened One Night, 1934, and his immortal line in Gone with the Wind, 1939, turned him into the symbol of masculine allure. Women swooned at his screen presence, men envied his swagger, and critics anointed him the ultimate romantic lead. With his mustache, his confidence, and his gravelly voice, Gable embodied desire itself. But behind the crown, the kingdom was rotting. Gable's private life carried shadows that few dared to speak aloud. His lovers described a man both magnetic and manipulative, whose charm could shift in an instant to cold domination. Actress Loretta Young later revealed that her secret pregnancy in 1935 came from a relationship with Gable, one she did not speak of publicly for decades. Young, just 22 at the time, endured exile from Hollywood during her pregnancy, forced into silence, while Gable's career only soared. Her daughter, Judy Lewis, grew up never publicly acknowledged by the father whose face adorned billboards worldwide. The public image of a devoted leading man was carefully stage-managed. MGM shielded him relentlessly, ensuring headlines celebrated his box office triumphs, not the betrayals left in his wake. Reporters whispered about his affairs with married co-stars, his coldness to women who challenged him, and his ability to walk away without consequence. But the whispers never made it to the papers, at least not in the golden age. The dissonance was painful. On screen, Gable's characters won women with charisma, yet the real-life consequences of his seductions left scars on families and reputations. He got everything he wanted, one insider remarked bitterly, and left others to carry the wreckage. Even Gable's personal tragedies were cloaked in contradictions. His marriage to Carole Lombard was idolized as Hollywood's great love story, and when she died in a 1942 plane crash, the world wept with him. Yet the tenderness audiences believed in was undercut by the knowledge of the other women, the other lives, the other truths Gable left scattered behind him. Hero, seducer, icon, betrayer. Romance was his empire, but its foundations were laid on silence, and silence, in Hollywood, was never free. That was only one more fracture in the dream. Others were waiting to be exposed. Laurence Olivier was worshipped as the god of Shakespeare, the actor who made iambic pentameter thunder like a drumbeat of destiny. His Hamlet, 1948, not only won 4 Academy Awards, but cemented him as the greatest classical actor of his generation. Critics declared his performances divine, and newspapers hailed him as the man who could make kings and warriors feel more real than history itself.
But also about the values he stood for.
Olivier was artistry incarnate, a figure of refinement and genius.
The loss of Jonathan had a profound writing and producing.
A different
he spent
Olivier
summers
prowled.
on his father's film
Colleagues
sets,
spoke of
like
his
the
cruelty,
Scarlet and
his
Level
manipulations,
campaigns. Carrie
his
Peck
obsession
moved
with
into the
control.
private sector as
Actress
a bank
Joan
officer.
Plowright, who would
Later,
later
he
become
found
his
a last
wife, recalled how he ruled rehearsal rooms with an iron tongue, shamming actors until they wept. His brilliance on stage was matched by a private temper that few dared challenge. He could slice you open with a glance, one co-star confessed, and he enjoyed it. Most haunting were the recollections from Vivien Leigh, Olivier's second wife. Their marriage, once celebrated as a union of 2 luminous stars, devolved into a storm of jealousy, infidelity, and despair. Leigh, already struggling with mental illness, described Olivier's indifference and cruelty as a weight that worsened her decline. Letters revealed her pleading for his affection, while Olivier pursued affairs with younger women. Behind the public facade of England's golden couple lay nights of screaming arguments, slammed doors, and tears hidden from reporters. Even his children and proteges remembered him less as a mentor and more as a tyrant. He wanted absolute obedience, one actor recalled. It wasn't about art, it was about power. The irony was brutal. On stage, Olivier embodied nobility and tragic vulnerability. Off-stage, he wielded humiliation like a sword, leaving colleagues shaken and wounded. To the world, he was the Shakespearean giant. To those who lived in his shadow, he was a man who fed on control, a monarch whose throne was built on fear. Applause roared in the theaters. Silence reigned in the homes. The world crowned him a genius. Those closest to him whispered another word, tormentor. And if even the so-called greatest actor of the century could be so monstrous, how deep did the rot in Hollywood's golden age truly go? Kirk Douglas built his career on intensity. With the cleft chin, the smoldering glare, and the raw energy he poured into films like Champion, 1949, and Spartacus, 1960, he became the image of masculine willpower. He played gladiators, generals, and flawed anti-heroes who refused to bow. The public adored him as a self-made titan, the son of poor immigrants who clawed his way into Hollywood royalty. His story was supposed to be the American dream. But within Hollywood's whisper network, Douglas's name carried a different weight. For decades, rumors circulated of coercion, manipulation, and violence that were carefully concealed by the system that profited from his stardom. Several actresses spoke of encounters marked not by romance, but by intimidation. He took what he wanted, one industry insider said bluntly, and no one dared stop him. The darkest allegations surfaced in hushed tones long after the golden age had dimmed, that Douglas assaulted actress Natalie Wood when she was still a teenager in the 1950s.
He went on to become
Though Wood
the
never
inaugural
publicly named
director
him,
of their
her
largest
close
site
friends
in
later
Long Beach,
recounted how she
California.
carried the trauma throughout her life, with her sister, Lana Wood, eventually stating outright that Douglas had been the man responsible. Hollywood knew, Lana claimed, but Hollywood stayed silent. Even without that damning account, Douglas's reputation behind the scenes was troubling. Crew members remembered his rages, the way he would erupt when challenged, reducing assistants to tears. Co-stars often found him manipulative, feigning warmth one moment and turning icy the next. He was a master not just of performance, but of power games. The studios protected him relentlessly. By the time Spartacus made him a cultural hero, credited with breaking the Hollywood blacklist, Douglas had been elevated into a moral crusader. Few dared suggest that the man celebrated for restoring justice to blacklisted writers might have inflicted injustice on others in private. The contradiction was almost unbearable. Savior in the public eye, predator in the shadows. For survivors, the cost was lifelong. Natalie Wood's death in 1981 only deepened the fog of speculation, her secrets buried wide.
The loss of Jonathan had a profound
seemed fitting for a man who had always exuded a calm strength, never needing